Hello everybody, today is November 23rd, 2013, and is the first installment of Digital Zen. I am Daniel Miles, and I will be your host, so let's begin. I'd like to begin by explaining who I am. So the easy answer is Daniel Miles. That's the easy answer, but the hardest answer, and what people usually tend to do, is describing yourself by what you do. And the problem with that is that sometimes there's a disconnect between who you are and what you do. So if I am to follow that route, I'll go, I'm a teenager, I'm a thinker, as you'll find out later. I'm a writer, a chess player, brother, son, student, athlete, etc. But to understand me and to understand this channel, I want to give a little background into Digital Zen. So officially, it is the musings of the inquisitive, from books to Buddha and music to social media. However, there's a little bit more than that. I really want to use this channel and this podcast as a way to express ideas. I think I have a lot of good ideas, but I've always had a lot of trouble expressing them. So that's part two, I guess. Part three, it's this journey of self-discovery. I mean, as I talk about these things and I discuss, I'm in that process learning as well. So that's part three. Next part is, at its very most basic level, it's just a way for me to practice talking. As I've said before, I feel I do have these great ideas and that I have trouble expressing them and talking about them and discussing them to this nice computer screen, as I can see myself messing up and on the screen. It's just a way of me practicing my verbal and oratory skills. And then part five, and maybe this is the most profound reason for it, it's to practice overcoming my fear of talking to people. And it's not so much talking to people in and of itself, but wondering what can come from a conversation is what scares me. I guess it's a social fear of the unknown. So that, in a glimpse, is Digital Zen. So I want to take this episode to learn to know Daniel Miles, and I do that. I have a bunch of when I describe myself to people, like, tell me more about you, Daniel. I always start with these three very basic things, and then I'll go into some more. Those are books, music, and movies. Books I want to start with because they're probably one of the most profound parts of my life, the more obvious. When people see me around school, they usually see me with a book in my face, and not in the hallway. I tried that once, it didn't work out. So I wanted to, and I have these 5 books that I think describe who I am best as a person. The first one is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. The reason I put this as number 1 is because it's the most emotional and profound book I think I've ever read. I'm not going to give away too much about East of Eden, but it's kind of described as a modern retelling of the book of Genesis and the story of Cain and Abel. And as nerdy and uninteresting as that sounds, it really goes much more than that, and it speaks volumes into the human character and the human condition, as well as, a character analysis of the human person when faced with new circumstances and the presence of fear in relations from person to person. I still think of that book. I've reread it only once because it's a long book, but it's definitely my favorite book, and there are multiple reasons, but I highly recommend you reading it. And that's number 1. Number 2 is It's a Walk in the Woods by Bill Bryson. Now, I'm a huge reader, and I try and read all across the spectrum of literature, I guess. So this book, it's nonfiction. And it can be kind of described as an outdoors book because the premise of the book is that Bill Bryson, who lived in the UK for about 10 years and moved back to America, figured the best way to re-Americanize himself was to walk the Appalachian Trail, or hike the Appalachian Trail. So he's a larger gentleman, right? So he takes his even larger friend, Stephen Katz, on this trip with him to hike the Appalachian Trail. And it's kind of his pre-trip, duration, and post-account of the trail, what he learned about himself and about the trail itself. But the reason that I have it as number 2 is because it's the funniest book I've ever read. Usually, pretty much whenever Bill Bryson walks out the door, he writes a fantastic book about something. But this was the funniest book I've ever read, and I'm not going to disclose anything because I want to leave the jokes to you guys if you ever decide to read the book. So I'm not going to disclose anything, but it's a fantastically funny book, and it's a book you go back to when you're having a bad day and you want to laugh. But to go completely on the other end of the spectrum is number 3, and that's Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. The Catcher in the Rye to me is the quintessential teenage book. Holden Caulfield, I think, represents as a whole what teenagers want to say but don't say. Exploring the inside of a teenager who is given this insane amount of freedom. He's walking through New York City and he buys a prostitute but then doesn't do anything with her, and it's essentially just like, so, you want to talk about your feelings? And she's like, no, I really don't. I give horrible representations of these books, but they really, really are profound pieces of literature, and I highly recommend you read all of these. In fact, I'll link you to everything that I talk about, including the books, in the description of this video. But for some closing thoughts on Catcher in the Rye is that it really is a telling book about not only just teenagers at that time, during Salinger's time, but how, when you're going through the adolescent process, things that you pick up and things that you leave behind in terms of values. And you're going to see, if you've ever read, wide parts of the canon Salinger, that adults are seen as corrupt, and within children there's this opportunity, this clean slate, this openness, opportunity, and it really is a beautiful piece of work. And I transitioned to number 4, which is actually another book by J.D. Salinger. It's called 9 Stories. It's a collection of 9 short stories that he wrote. Some of the more notable ones, and the ones I'll talk about, are A Perfect Day for Banana Fish and For Esme with Love and Squalor. Now, these short stories were usually written by Salinger when he was serving in World War II. They definitely reflect things that he saw and experienced there. I actually start with For Esme with Love and Squalor. The story tells of a kind of disgruntled soldier who walks into a Parisian cafe while he's occupying it, and you have these 2 kids and kind of a uninterested nanny who's just kind of like, don't break anything and just exist for a little bit. So the girl comes over to the soldier, and, obviously not understanding the perils of war, she starts asking him, and he's like, are you an American GI? I was like, well, yes, I am. And what happens over the course of just a few pages, I think overall, if in book form it's about 20-25 pages, you get a glimpse into the life of an American GI during World War II, and especially at that time when they're on the offensive, they're occupying Paris. And the dichotomy between, you have the kind of naivete of the child and the experience of the adult, seeing the same thing through 2 perspectives. It's really telling of how we understand the world, and as we grow up, how we change. And I think that's why I like it so much. And then A Perfect Day for Banana Fish, I'm actually not going to talk about it because it's a short story. It's a very, very short story. And I can't really say anything about it without giving away most of it. So I'm going to leave it to the readers to decide. Next is Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. The reason I love this book so much is because it was my beginning of science fiction. And when I try and describe this book to people, and I'm like, Well, there's this guy, and he's stuck in time, and the Dresden bombings were a thing, but now he's an optometrist, and he got captured by an alien race. They're called the Tromafodorians, and they put him in a zoo with an actress, and, most people usually turn me out by that point, so I don't really continue. But it's so Vonnegut. It's such a classic Vonnegut book, and that's why I think most people see it as his best work. I think there are better ones, but it's the most relatable book to me because it really, really it does a good job of showing the Vonnegut style, and I think it's his best written book, but not his best book in general. So, in that case, I'd like to move on to music. Music is a very, very profound, and I'm involved with music all the time. I wake up with music. Actually, "Time" by Pink Floyd is my alarm clock in the morning. I usually shower in the morning to music. I drive to school with music. I walk the hallways with music. I come home with music. I fall asleep to music. So, music and the different artists and genres that I've listened to, I think have shaped me as a person in a very, very meaningful way. And so I want to share with you my five top bands and 3 top albums for those bands. And because I could go on forever talking about music, and I probably will at a later time, but for now I'll keep it to 5 and 3. So my favorite band, and number 1, is the Beatles. The Beatles were the first band that really got me into music. I wasn't really too much of a music-savvy gentleman up until that point. I remember in 7th grade I was at my sister's softball game, and on the way back, my mom put in a CD in the car, and the songs "Can't Buy Me Love" came on, and then "From Me to You." And I was like, "But Mom, he was just talking about money, and he doesn't need it." But he's like, "Oh, don't worry about it." I was like, "What album is this?" And he's like, "Oh, it's One by the Beatles." And I was like, "Huh, neat." So it didn't exactly happen there, but as I grew, physically grew, the interest in that kind of came back, and the Beatles have always been my favorite band, and I've had countless T-shirts, and they're plastered all over my walls, and their music really speaks volumes. Not only the music themselves, but the cultural impact that they had on society, and how they really kick-started music going into the 70s and further. So the first album that I have on there is Revolver. Revolver is my favorite album, I think, because of how experimental it is, and where they started in the previous Rubber Soul, and then they got into Revolver, and how they really changed the face of music. You have the song Norwegian Wood, which is the first pop song to ever feature a sitar. You have things like I'm Only Sleeping, and I always mention Dr. Robert when I talk about this album, because I had a chemistry teacher my junior year. His name was Mr. Patches, and his first name's Robert. And he's a quirky guy, and some of the lyrics just really, really relate to him in kind of an opposite way. So, number 2 is Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Why I like this album so much is because they took that experimental sound from Revolver, and then they just blew it out of the water in Sgt. Pepper's. And you have, and I think it's actually the first album to ever feature a band doing like an alter ego band with Sgt. Pepper's. I think CCR did it a little later with Willie and the Poor Boys, but I think the Beatles were the first one to do it. And you have songs like Lovely Rita and A Day in the Life, which is it's often seen as the Beatles' best song. I really don't see it, but apparently everyone else does. I like the song, but I just don't think it's the best piece. And then the last one is Abbey Road. Everyone's, I think, at least seen the cover of Abbey Road. I have it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places in my room. It's really, really it's a beautiful album. And what I like most about it is the progression of the songs makes it kind of a journey as you go from start to finish. The only exception of that is that the second to last track is called The End, and it ends with the famous lines, the love you make is equal to the love you take. And then the next song is something. It's more of a sound clip than a song, really. It's 23 seconds. It's called Her Majesty, and it's really just Paul doing this stupid little rhyme about the Queen. And it kills the moment, because you have beautiful songs like Come Together and Something and I Want You, She's So Heavy and Here Comes the Sun, and then you end with, like, you know, the love you take is equal to the love you make. It's like, oh wow, that's really nice. And then you just have this 23-second sound clip, and it's like, huh. Band number 2 is Radiohead. And I always mention these two bands together. I'm going to go through my 3 favorite albums first, and then I'll kind of explain this. But the first album is Kid A. You have songs like How to Disappear Completely and Kid A, the title track, and In Limbo, Idiotech, things like that. My second one is In Rainbows, Weird Fishes Are Peggy, Go Slowly, things like that. And then lastly, The King of Limbs. People always are surprised when I tell them that it's one of my favorite Radiohead albums, because everyone sees it as kind of a failure album. Over the course of Radiohead's career, they had gone from Brit pop at the beginning, and I'll actually go in. I'll start it now. So the reason that I always mention the Beatles and Radiohead together is because if you look at the progression of their music, it's almost identical, and that's cool because they're 40-ish years apart, and they're both doing the same thing, but under totally different circumstances. So, for example, the first couple Beatles albums, for The Beatles for Sale, Meet the Beatles, things like that, and then, like, you know, they're really pop, just like, She Loves You, yeah, 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 and, like, you know, Mop Top and that kind of thing. And on the flip side, on Radiohead, it's like, you know, their first album called Pablo Honey. It's, you know, the official genre is Brit pop, but, like, you know, it's your rock band, you know, drums, bass, synthesizers-ish, lead, rhythm guitars, things like that. And then you have kind of an experience, like, you know, let's try some new things album. For the Beatles, it's Rubber Soul, and for Radiohead, it's OK Computer. And then the next album, they take that thing, they take that trial, and then they really make it something. They really make it work. For the Beatles, it was Revolver, and for Radiohead, it was Kid A. Radiohead took this electronic style, this, like, I think we could really make something cool out of this, and they make it work. And there's a reason that Kid A is one of, you know, it's listed on, I think, Rolling Stone's one of the top best albums of all time. As they continue, they have this Zenith album. For the Beatles, it was, why can't I remember? Oh yeah, Abbey Road. Duh, just mentioned it. For the Beatles, it was Abbey Road, and then for Radiohead, it was In Rainbows. In Rainbows was actually the first Radiohead album I've ever heard. It was actually in a place called School Kids Records down in downtown Raleigh, which is the next town over for me. And from there, this electronic journey into Radiohead, this band I'd never heard before. But they had this breakout album in Rainbows, or Abbey Road. And then the next album is seen as a failure by their general fan bases. For the Beatles, it was Let It Be, and for Radiohead, it was King of Limbs. I think it's interesting because I love both of those albums, yet everyone sees them as a failure. You know, for Let It Be, you have songs like Get Back and One After 909 and Dig a Pony, and King of Limbs, you have things like Separator and Feral and Little by Little, Lotus Flower, things like that. But seeing the two bands experience the same musical growth 40 years apart and having them coincidentally be two of my favorite bands, it's really cool, and it's really coincidental. And it's kind of funny how both of those bands had equally affected who I am as a person. The Beatles a little bit more because they got me into music, but, you know, it's special to me. It really is. And actually, the third band, Daft Punk, they kind of were the outcome of me getting into Radiohead. For people, I think most people know Daft Punk. They are the robot guys. They wear these crazy robot helmets. They started recording in 1990, and they didn't really get famous till this year. I'll go into that in a minute. The first album, Discovery. It was really their first studio album to get really any notoriety. And you have songs like One More Time and Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, which actually Kanye West used in a song Stronger just a few years ago. Number 2 is the Tron Legacy soundtrack. Tron Legacy came out in 2011, I think, and it was a really, really bad movie. It was just terrible. I had never seen Tron, so I was like, I'll go see Tron, and I'll see Tron Legacy. It was a really, really bad movie. But the exception of that was the soundtrack. Daft Punk did the soundtrack for the movie, the entire movie, and what they did is that they combined your typical soundtrack, like your background cellos, your background violins, things like that, and then they made it digital. So you have things like a synthesizer and an electric keyboard, violins and cellos and standing basses in the same song, and they really made it work. So in this midst of a terrible movie, you have a really, really good soundtrack. And they also made a couple cameos in it, so I was okay with it. And then the last one is Random Access Memories. To me, it's kind of a controversial album because what they did after being really, really electronic in their previous album, Human After All, they kind of they took a dip into pop. They invited some guest singers, and and the song "Get Lucky," which they're now famous for, which is frustrating because they had so much good stuff before "Get Lucky." I think it's the guy who gyrated with Miley Cyrus at the VMAs, but I've been told that's wrong. But I'm going to stick to it until proven otherwise. But it has fantastic songs, but it's kind of frustrating to see them be so famous for something that I think is kind of skewed from their actual genre. And number 4, I think anyone. I'm kind of an old soul when it comes to music, and I think this will be on a lot of people's lists above the age of 40. It's kind of sad, but it's Pink Floyd. Of course, I have to mention The Dark Side of the Moon, because that's the album everyone knows, and it's like, hey, did they did that song with the Cadre? I think it was called, Money. It's actually number 3. It's not my favorite album, because I think they have much better than that. My favorite album is actually the first studio album. It's called The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Most notably on that album is a song called Interstellar Overdrive, and a song called Astronomy Dynamine. I like this album so much because I was coming from, at that time, from Radiohead, from Daft Punk, and hearing that kind of mix of the Beatles and Radiohead is like, oh my gosh, what more can you ask for? And then you go on, and there's another song, another album called Metal. And I mention this because it has the 28-minute song called Echoes, which, I've been talking for 23 minutes now, so if I was to play this song in the background, it still wouldn't be done. And it has another song called, oh gosh, I'm blanking out on it now. Green is the Color, and, I forgot it. Oh well. And then third, Dark Side of the Moon. Notable mentions, though, are the album Wish You Were Here. It has the song Shine On You Crazy Diamond Part 1 and 2, and then the title song Wish You Were Here, it's one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard, I think. I actually used it for an English project last year. And then number 5 is the Jimi Hendrix Experience. I mentioned this because the Experience kind of was a result. It was the Beatles amplified. It was the Beatles but taken another step. And you have the Beatles sound amplified, and then you have Pink Floyd's lyrical and musical writing double amplified. The favorite album is definitely Electric Ladyland. I think the album artwork is simple but beautiful, and then the musical writing is just amazing. It's the third studio album, right after Are You Experienced and Access Bold as Love, and I'll touch on Are You Experienced here because it's actually my number 2 favorite album. It has I think the most famous Jimi Hendrix artwork, the yellow background, and then you have kind of a pink tint to Jimi Hendrix, Mitch Mitchell's, and then whoever was their bassist at the time. I don't really care about basses, sorry. My friend is a bassist, and I always give him crap about it, and is the least important member of the band. But you know, you have songs like "Are You Experienced," the title track, which actually I think is an especially beautiful song because it's kind of the beginning of the genre called acid rock. The Beatles, I think, kind of touched on it with Magical Mystery Tour and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, but the Experience really perfected it. And they did a really, really beautiful job with it. The number 3 album, it actually just came out last year in 2012. It's called People, Hell, and Angels. It has Easy Blues is one of my favorite songs to this date, and that's the 3rd track of the song. And then you have a song Earth Blues, and then probably like the 9th remake of Hear My Train A-Comin' and Bleeding Heart. And I mentioned music, as I talked about before, it's because as I've grown as a person, both physically and spiritually, mentally, etc., I think music has been a great catalyst for that. It's opened me to new ideas, to new perspectives, to new sounds. And music being such a good transferal of ideas and beliefs and passions, I think it's a very, very good influence, but can also be used negatively. And I think that's interesting because it's available to all the public, especially in this age of information. I could go to the Pirate Bay and download an album if I wanted to in 2.5 minutes. So it's so open to the public and so available that you have such an amazing way to spread ideas. And I think that I've taken in quite a variety of ideas over the years. And so I'll end music there, and I want to go into movies real fast, because right now in another browser I have open Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is my favorite movie of all time. It is the quintessential teenage movie, I think. It is, I love this movie so much for so many reasons. It's the quintessential teenage movie, humor, and escaping from the parents right at the perfect moment, the faking sick right at the beginning of the movie, and then also the friendship between Cameron and Ferris is perfectly summing up the friendship between my best friend Joe and I, and it's just so funny to watch it being amplified and exaggerated like it is in the movie. And then the second is Happy Gilmore. This was before Adam Sandler sold his soul to the devil, and he was actually funny. And people talk about it as the best golf movie since Caddyshack, and I would agree that it's much better than Caddyshack. I don't think it should be compared. And a lot of older people would be like, "Oh, but Bill Murray, no." I would have to disagree. There's really no life lessons you can learn from Happy Gilmore. It's a comedy. It's a feel-good movie at the end. So I'm not going to go into the philosophy of Adam Sandler through Happy Gilmore, but I just think it's a wonderful movie, and I go back and watch it all the time. But then I'm going to take a total flip here and go to number 3, which is The Watchmen. Now, the reason I love The Watchmen so much is because it does so many things at the same time. It makes fun of American culture, it idolizes American culture, it criticizes American culture. You have so many perspectives through the different characters, but Zack Snyder and Alan Moore, who did the comic book, which I actually read first, which was fantastic, they make it cohesive and they make it work. The Watchmen is home to so many of my favorite characters. Rorschach, especially, he's actually the background of my computer. But you have people like the Comedian and Night Owl, Dr. Manhattan, people like that. And it does so much, and it's very telling philosophically. It's a really profound movie. And number 4 is actually, I'm going to take another flip back to comedy. Shaun of the Dead. It's part of a kind of a trilogy of movies. The first one is Hot Fuzz, and then the second is Shaun of the Dead, and then the third actually just came out. It's called The World's End. And the 2 actors are Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, and they're best friends in all 3 of the movies, and they're just hilarious movies. Again, I'm not going to go into the philosophical values of Shaun of the Dead, but they're just wonderful movies to watch and to laugh at. And then number 5 I'm actually kind of ashamed that I put it all the way down to number 5, but it's the Star Wars movies. No particular one. There's going to be the battle between the prequels and the original series. But the Star Wars franchise is just so wonderful. I can't really express it. They, to me, sum up the best of cinematography up to that point, but also into movie soundtracks. John Williams did a fantastic job with the soundtrack to all of the movies, really. To all the movies, and actually, Episode 7 is coming out December 8th, 2015. And John Williams is going to be back for the soundtrack. I play the Imperial March when I'm walking into school, and I play the Cantina Band music when I'm in a bad mood and I just want to smile. But the movies, they really captured the American mind, and they made it a little bit more accessible to science fiction, I think. And also Harrison Ford, so that's it. But now that I've talked about, just basic things like movies and books and music, I kind of want to go a little deeper and talk about some of the things that interest me. Number 1 on the list is writing and reading. I read voraciously, and I write voraciously. And I think the reason that I like writing and reading so much, especially writing, because it's my own way of creating. And it's not only just seeing your ideas down on paper and making it a little bit more real, but when you've slaved over a short story, you slaved over a novel for months, and you put the last period and you peer at it for the last time, and you say, that's mine. That's something that I created. It's really a fantastic feeling. And it's the one that's most accessible to me. People have music making, people have cinematography, people have photography, but writing and reading, that's really what speaks the most to me, and that's how I've been able to express my ideas up to this point. Wow, my hair is really getting bad. Oh man, that's unfortunate. Anyway, number 2 is music. Like I said, music is a very, very big part of my life. I listen to music all the time, and I explore music all the time, but listening is just one part of it. When you start to understand the background of the people who are in those bands and the people who make that music, and you understand the context of their lives and how it affects their music, it's really wonderful that you can connect to that other person, even if they've been dead for 80 years, 100 years. If I'm listening to John Lennon's Imagine, he's been dead, I think, now 43 years, I want to say. But the fact that he can still transport his ideas to me as a teenager in 2013 is really profound, and that I understand the context of it. Number 3 is playing chess. Now, a lot of people laugh when I say that, but I think playing chess is kind of the manifestation of me as a person. Now, I explain this in ways where, it's you, a board of 64 squares, and then another person. And on those 64 squares, you have 32 pieces, 16 for each team. 8 pawns, 2 bishops, 2 knights, 2 rooks, a queen, and a king. But it's more than that. Chess, to me, is the essential strategy game. It's the quintessential intellectual battle. You have you, a board, and then the other person. And it's like you're intellectually challenging them with every move that you make and with every move you counter. But on the flip side of that, a lot of my friends play chess with me, and it really depends on how competitive you are when you're playing. But sometimes chess is just a good thing to just kind of sit down, relax, and have a conversation with a friend over. It's really just it's a friendly activity, and it's something that speaks a lot about those who play it. Because if you really, really care about chess, then you're going to put a lot of work into it, just like anything, really. And being able to sit down and talk with your friends over a game of chess, it's relaxing, it's contemplative, and it's something that makes me feel very, very alive. and very warm, I guess. And then number 4 is pretty much the basis for Digital Zen, and that's thinking. Obviously we have to think. We think to survive, but there's more than that. And a lot of people kind of like, well, everyone thinks. Why does thinking interest you? Well, first, on the personal basis, if you understand how you think, you're in the position to make yourself so much of a better person. Intellectually, spiritually, mentally, physically, better. Psychology is kind of the basis, it's kind of like thinking manifested, and understanding how we interact, not sociological, but how we interact within ourselves and how we use that to interact elsewhere within our, communities and families and what have you. It's really, really wonderful. It just makes it's like chess. It makes me feel very alive. And kind of sometimes you just sit back and you contemplate things. You wonder why, and you wonder how, and you wonder what is going on. And I think thinking is something that a lot of people should do. Okay, I'll say critical thinking. Critical thinking. Not a lot of people want to sit down and meditate for 20 minutes. Not a lot of people want to really sit down and think about what they're doing. They just kind of do it. And I'm not saying that, us thinkers are the masters of philosophy and life on earth, except for my foundation's teacher. His name's Mr. Martin. He's the master of everything. But I'm just saying that I think society as a whole can benefit by a good amount of critical thinking. So I'm going to end basic interest there, because people always ask me, I'm at the age now where, okay, you've done all this thinking, so what do you want to do with your life? Well, I've gotten the essential question, so where do you want to go to college? I've gotten it from every person over the age of 25, forever. And to just answer everyone, to spare me the question again, I've applied to 7 different schools across 2 states and a district. George Washington up in D.C., and then College of Charleston in South Carolina, and then several schools here in my home state of North Carolina. But to me, that's just the first step. I have, if everything ever works out perfectly, then this is what I want to do. Once I graduate from college, I want to get an internship at a place called the American Civil Liberties Union, and I'll explain why in a minute. The next step would be going to grad school to get a JD for law and a master's in library science. A law librarian is my dream job, and a lot of people really don't know what that is, and most people never really heard of it. And so a law librarian is one who kind of does the research and does the background for the case and then presents it to the attorney, and the attorney argues it. I feel that I lack the oratory skills to be a lawyer, but if I don't go into a law librarianship, then I do want to be a civil liberties lawyer. Civil liberties is something that interests me very much, because I see of all these people, we have this great American democracy. Whether or not it's in a decline or not is an issue for another time. We have this great American democracy where we're granted so many things, and I see them being taken away from people all the time, usually unreasonably. And if I had to have the opportunity to protect that, I think that's something I definitely want to do. But I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I want to talk about family and friends, and I think I'm going to end it there. Or at least for this episode, of course. Family, I think, family is overrated to me. Maybe it's because I haven't been particularly close with my family. But I have a brother. He's 23. He works for the state. I have a sister. She's 21. She studies social work. I have my extended family out in up in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine sometimes, and my grandmother lives actually just down the street. She used to live in New York. But I see all of my friends being so content and so happy with their family setting, and I'm really not. My dad works in New York during the week, so it's kind of tough. God bless him, he works, he gets up and takes an early plane on Monday morning and flies back Friday night. And then my mom is she's a stay-at-home mom. So I guess since both myself and my family have kind of been at different times in our lives, so we've never really been one holistic system of systems. And I feel like I'm very sad because I feel like I've lost out on a great opportunity, and it's really disappointing, I guess. And then my friends. My friends are the closest allies that I have in the world. The closeness and the wonder and the warmth that I feel that I'm with my friends is really special. Every Friday we have these traditions that every Friday and Saturday nights. On Fridays we go to a diner, 50s style diner called Gypsies, and then on Saturday night we go to a fast food joint called Cookout. And of course I see my friends during all the time during the week all the time. But it's very easy to get away from friends, not maybe inadvertently, but those times where we just kind of sit down, eat, and talk, it's when I feel the most happy. It's when I feel the most alive. My friends play a very, very, very important role in my life, and I honestly couldn't be more happy that I've met the people that I have. And looking forward, I'm so excited by the people I can meet. So on that depressing note, I think that'll end the first episode of Digital Zen. Thank you all to all my 6 subscribers. I hope you guys keep listening, and I hope you all have a good day.